By the early 1980s, Long John Silver's had more than 1,000 restaurants, and it was the largest fast food seafood chain in the United States. Not one of the largest, with essentially no serious rival in its entire corner of the industry. In a country obsessed with the burger and the fried chicken bucket and the pizza, Long John Silver's had pulled off something that sounds almost impossible. It had made fast, cheap, fried seafood into a national habit. It had planted 1,000 little wooden ships in strip malls from coast to coast, and it had convinced millions of landlocked Americans, people who lived 1,000 miles from the nearest ocean, to pull off the highway for a cardboard box of battered fish, hush puppies, and those crunchy little fried bits. The blue roofs, the nautical cupolas, the ship's wheel on the wall. For a certain era of American life, that whole seafaring fantasy was as familiar as the Golden Arches. At its peak, the chain approached, by some counts, around 1,400 locations. Today, it's down to a few hundred, and shrinking, the survivors scattered and often tucked into shared buildings alongside other fast food brands, the standalone wooden ship restaurants growing rarer every year. The largest fast food seafood empire America ever built has spent the last 3 decades slowly, quietly sinking. This is the story of how that happened. And it's a genuinely fascinating one, because Long John Silver's was fighting an uphill battle from the very first day. It was, in a real sense, always swimming against the current, and yet for a long time it won anyway, dominating its category so completely that its struggles were invisible. And then 2 things happened at almost the same moment. The country's relationship with the food Long John Silver's sold began to turn against it. And a single financial decision, made in a boardroom in 1989, loaded the company with a mountain of debt it would never climb out from under. The current it had been swimming against for years finally caught it, right as someone tied a weight to its ankle. And to understand all of it, you have to start somewhere surprising. Not on a coast, but in Kentucky, with a hamburger stand. The deep roots of Long John Silver's reach back to 1929, to Shelbyville, Kentucky, and a man named Jerome Lederer, who opened a tiny 6-seat hamburger stand called the White Tavern Shop. This is landlocked Kentucky, the middle of the country, about as far from the sea as you can get in America. Remember that, because it matters enormously. Lederer's little hamburger business grew through the Depression, then got hammered by the shortages of World War II, which forced him to close most of his shops. But after the war in 1946, he regrouped and founded a company called Jericho Incorporated and launched a new restaurant called Jerry's. And here's the crucial thing about Jericho, the thing that would eventually give birth to Long John Silver's. It was a company that loved to experiment. Jericho was, from early on, one of the pioneers of the franchise model. And it was relentlessly willing to test new restaurant concepts, to try things, to take risks. Lederer hired a sharp young manager named Warren Rosenthal in 1948, and when Lederer died in 1963, Rosenthal took over the company. And Rosenthal really loved to experiment. Through the 1960s, Jericho tested a whole parade of different restaurant ideas: a roast beef sandwich concept, a full-service seafood place called Davy's Dock, a Spanish food restaurant called Don Q's, an upscale dining concept called the Governor's Table. Most of these you've never heard of because most of them didn't make it. Jericho was throwing concepts at the wall, seeing what stuck, running a kind of restaurant laboratory in the middle of Kentucky. There's something worth appreciating in that laboratory approach because it's the unglamorous secret behind a lot of great American businesses. Jericho didn't stumble onto Long John Silver's by luck. It found it by trying and failing and trying again, by treating the restaurant business as a series of experiments, most of which were expected to fail, in the hope that one would break through. Davy's Dock, that early full-service seafood restaurant, mattered enormously, even though almost nobody remembers it, because it taught the company about serving seafood, about what worked and what didn't. Rosenthal was paying attention, learning, refining. He noticed the fish and chips concept catching on, studied a competing chain closely, and formed a conviction that there was a real and untapped hunger in America for fast, cheap, quality seafood. That conviction didn't come from nowhere. It came from a decade of experiments, of watching customers, of a company culture that rewarded testing bold ideas. When Long John Silver's finally hit, it looked like a sudden success. It was really the product of years of patient, unglamorous trial and error. And in 1969, one of those experiments stuck harder than anyone could have imagined. Rosenthal had been studying the market and he'd noticed something. Fast food in America was dominated by a few things: the hamburger, pizza, fried chicken. But there was a category almost nobody was serving quickly and cheaply: seafood. He'd studied the competition, particularly a fish and chips chain, and he became convinced there was a real, untapped market for quick-service seafood, an alternative to the burger for the millions of people who wanted something different, or who, for religious reasons, needed a fish option on Fridays. So Rosenthal recruited a Jerry's franchisee named James Patterson to help him build it, and together they opened the first Long John Silver's Fish and Chips in Lexington, Kentucky in 1969. Patterson became the first president of the chain. They named it, wonderfully, after the pirate. Long John Silver is the famous one-legged pirate from Robert Louis Stevenson's classic novel Treasure Island, a name that instantly conjured the sea, adventure, ships, treasure, the whole romantic seafaring world, and they built the restaurants to match. The early Long John Silvers were designed in a New England, Cape Cod style. The architect took the original building and gave it that seaside look, and the chain ran with it. Blue roofs, square cupolas on top, like something off a coastal cottage, wooden benches and tables, lobster pots, ship's wheels mounted on the walls, nautical everything. The whole idea was to transport you, to take a person in a strip mall in Ohio or Indiana or Texas, 1,000 miles from any ocean, and make them feel for the length of a meal like they were in a little seaside fish shack on the coast of Maine. And the food delivered on that fantasy in a way people genuinely loved. The heart of it was fish. Whitefish dipped in a distinctive seasoned batter and fried until it came out golden and crackling in that specific shatter-when-you-bite-it shell that was Long John Silver's signature. Alongside it came the chips, the fries, and the hush puppies, those little round balls of fried cornmeal, sweet and crisp, that people adored. There was fried shrimp and clams and chicken for the seafood averse. There was coleslaw, and there were those cardboard boxes and paper trays. And there was one thing that people remember with an almost irrational fondness: the crumblies, the crunchies, those little bits of loose fried batter, the crispy fragments that fell off the fish in the fryer, which Long John Silver's would scoop up and pile onto your order. Free, crunchy, salty nuggets of pure fried joy. People loved the crumblies with a passion that says everything about what this food was. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't health food. It was hot, salty, crunchy, fried comfort, and it hit a very deep and very human pleasure button, and for a while, America pushed that button over and over again. Let me linger on the experience of it, the way it lives in people's memories, because that's the thing that's really being mourned when people talk about the old Long John Silvers. Picture a Friday evening in 1979. You pull into the lot, and there it is. The little building with the blue roof and the cupola, looking for all the world like it washed up from Cape Cod, glowing warm against a Midwestern dusk. Inside, the smell hits you first: hot oil and fried fish and something salty and briny, the closest thing to the sea most of the room had ever smelled. You order at the counter and it comes fast, in a box or on a tray. The fish in its craggy golden batter, the hush puppies tumbling out beside it, the fries, the little tub of tartar sauce, or the malt vinegar you shook on until the batter went soft at the edges, and piled on top the crumblies, those free crispy bits, the thing the kids reached for first. You'd slide into a wooden booth under a ship's wheel, maybe a fishing net on the wall, a plastic lobster, and for the length of that meal you were somewhere else. Somewhere with a coast, somewhere with adventure. A pirate's table in the middle of a landlocked American town. It was cheap. It was fun. It felt like a small voyage. And for a whole generation of families, that was the taste and the feeling of a Good Friday night, and it lodged deep enough that grown adults still get a little wistful at the mere memory of the crumblies. Because the concept worked. And it worked fast. Long John Silver's took off almost immediately. By 1971, just 2 years after opening, it had already blown past 200 locations and become Jericho's single most successful chain, bigger than Jerry's, bigger than any of the experiments, the clear winner of the whole restaurant laboratory. In 1973, they expanded the menu to a wider range of seafood and renamed it Long John Silver's Seafood Shops. And through the 1970s and into the 1980s, it just grew and grew, aggressive expansion year after year, until it crossed 1,000 locations in the early 80s and stood as the undisputed king of fast food seafood in America. This was the golden era, the period when Long John Silver's cemented itself into American dining culture, the place a whole generation of families went for a fish dinner. They didn't have to cook in a fun little pirate ship for cheap. Now, here's where we have to talk about the thing that made all of this success genuinely remarkable and also genuinely fragile. Because selling fast food seafood in America is much, much harder than selling burgers, and Long John Silver's was quietly fighting two deep structural disadvantages the entire time, even at the height of its success. Understanding these two disadvantages is the key to understanding the whole fall, because they were always there, lurking, and they're what made the chain so vulnerable when the hard times finally came. The first disadvantage is the simplest and the most powerful. A huge number of Americans just don't like seafood or don't trust it. This is not a small thing. Think about a burger. Almost everyone eats beef. A hamburger is about as universally accepted as food gets in America. It's the safe choice, the default, the thing you can serve to a group of 10 people and be confident 9 of them will happily eat it. Seafood is the opposite. Fish is one of the most polarizing foods there is. Millions of people don't like the taste. Millions more are suspicious of it, worried about freshness, put off by the smell, scared of bones, or simply never developed a taste for it growing up. And this is especially true in the middle of the country, in the vast, landlocked heartland where Long John Silver's did most of its business, regions with no coastal seafood tradition, where people grew up on beef and pork and chicken and viewed fish with genuine wariness. So right from the start, Long John Silver's was selling a product that a large chunk of its potential customers simply would not eat under any circumstances. It had voluntarily walked into the fast food arena carrying a product with a much smaller natural audience than its burger-slinging competitors. That it succeeded anyway, that it built a 1,000-restaurant empire on a food half the country was skeptical of, is a real testament to how well it executed. But that narrow, skeptical base was a permanent structural weakness, a smaller foundation to stand on, and it meant the chain had far less margin for error than a burger chain did. The second structural disadvantage took longer to bite, but it turned out to be even deadlier, and it's this. Long John Silver's entire identity was built on fried food, at the exact moment in history when America was beginning a long, slow turn against fried food. Everything Long John Silver's sold, or nearly everything, was battered and deep fried. The fish, the shrimp, the clams, the chicken, the hush puppies, the beloved crumblies. Fried, 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 fried. That was the whole appeal in 1975, when nobody was counting calories and fried and crispy meant delicious. But starting in the late 1970s and accelerating hard through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, America underwent a profound shift in how it thought about food and health. People became conscious of fat, of cholesterol, of calories, of the dangers of a heavy fried diet. Being healthy became a mainstream cultural value, and a chain whose entire menu was a monument to the deep fryer found itself increasingly on the wrong side of where the culture was heading. The very thing that made Long John Silver's food so satisfying, that hot, greasy, battered, fried indulgence, became, in the eyes of a growing number of health-conscious Americans, exactly the kind of food you were supposed to avoid. The chain's core identity was slowly transforming from a tasty treat into a guilty pleasure, and then for some, into a thing I just don't eat anymore. Put those two disadvantages together and you see the trap. Long John Silver's was selling a food a lot of people wouldn't eat, in a form that a growing number of people were trying to eat less of. It was swimming against two currents at once, the seafood skeptic current and the anti-frying current, and both of those currents were getting stronger over time, not weaker. And there's a particularly cruel irony hidden in that health turn because seafood itself should have been perfectly positioned for it. As Americans got more health conscious, they were told over and over to eat more fish. Fish is lean, fish is heart healthy, fish is the protein the doctors want you eating. In principle, a seafood chain should have ridden that wave beautifully, should have been the healthy fast food option, the guilt-free choice. But Long John Silver's couldn't, because it didn't really sell fish. It sold fried fish, fish encased in a thick, deep-fried batter shell. Fish transformed by the fryer into something as indulgent as any burger. So the chain got the worst of both worlds. It didn't win the health-conscious diners who wanted grilled, clean, light seafood because its fish was drowned in batter and oil, and it was increasingly avoided by the calorie counters who'd once eaten there for a treat. The one food trend that might have saved a seafood chain sailed right past Long John Silver's because the chain had built its whole soul around the deep fryer. And the deep fryer was exactly what the new era was turning away from. There had also been, for years, a quieter tailwind that was fading: religion. For generations of American Catholics, Fridays, and especially the Fridays of Lent, meant no meat, which meant fish, which meant a reliable, recurring reason to visit a place like Long John Silver's. That religious rhythm had helped fill the dining rooms on Friday nights, and it had been a real part of the chain's business. But as the decades passed, an observance of the meatless Friday tradition softened across much of American life. That built-in weekly reason to eat fish grew weaker too. One more current, subtle but real, shifting against the chain over time. For years, the chain overcame all of this through sheer dominance. It was the only real fast food seafood game in town, so everyone who did want quick fried fish had essentially nowhere else to go. That monopoly on the category masked the underlying fragility for a long time. But a business built on a narrowing base, selling an increasingly out-of-favor product, is a business that needs everything else to go right. It has no cushion. It cannot afford a major mistake. And then, in 1989, it made a major mistake. Or rather, a mistake was made to it. To understand what happened, you have to remember that Long John Silver's was owned by Jericho, the Kentucky parent company, which by this point was a publicly traded restaurant group. And in 1989, Jericho was taken private through what's called a highly leveraged management-led buyout. Now, we need to unpack that phrase, because it is the hinge on which the entire fall swings. A leveraged buyout is a deal in which a group of buyers purchases a company using a huge amount of borrowed money, and then, crucially, they load that borrowed debt directly onto the company itself. The company essentially takes on an enormous loan in order to buy itself, and then has to spend years using its own profits to pay that loan back. In 1989, at the height of the leveraged buyout craze that swept American business in that era, Jericho was taken private this way, and it emerged from the deal carrying a heavy, heavy load of debt. It's worth pausing to feel how strange and destructive that arrangement is because it sits at the center of so many of these restaurant collapses. In a normal world, you'd think a company gets stronger when someone buys it. New owners, fresh energy, investment. A leveraged buyout is the opposite. The company doesn't receive money. It takes on debt. The buyers use the company's own future earnings as the collateral and the repayment engine for the loan they used to buy it. Imagine buying a house by making the house itself take out the mortgage and pay it off from then on, forever, before it could be repaired or improved. That's roughly the position Long John Silver's was placed in. The people doing the deal got their ownership. The company got the bill. And from that day forward, a huge share of every dollar the restaurants earned was spoken for before it could be spent on anything that might actually help the restaurants. This kind of deal can work when a business is growing fast and has a wide, stable market to grow into. It is catastrophic when applied to a business that is fragile that needs to reinvent itself, that is already fighting structural headwinds. And Long John Silver's was exactly the second kind of business. And then, in 1990, the newly private company made a fateful decision that concentrated all the risk. It divested its other restaurant concepts, sold off Jerry's, sold off a growing Italian chain called Fazoli's, sold off the rest, in order to focus its full attention on Long John Silver's. On paper, focus sounds like a good thing, but look at what it actually meant. It meant that the entire crushing debt load from that leveraged buyout now rested on the shoulders of a single business, Long John Silver's, the one chain. The fried seafood chain, with its narrow, skeptical customer base and its increasingly out-of-favor deep-fried menu, was now also carrying a mountain of buyout debt all by itself, with no other healthy brands to help share the weight. There's a bitter footnote there, too. One of the concepts they sold off to prop up Long John Silver's was Fazoli's, the Italian chain, which went on to do just fine on its own. The company had, in a sense, sold its healthier children to pay the debts piled onto its most vulnerable one. This is the fatal combination, and it's worth being very clear about why it was so deadly. Debt is not just a number. Debt is a permanent, relentless drain. Every single month, before Long John Silver's could spend $1 on anything else, it had to service that debt, make the payments, feed the loan. And that meant there was no money left for the things the chain desperately needed to do to survive its two structural disadvantages. There was no money to renovate the aging restaurants, which were starting to look dated and tired. There was little money to genuinely innovate the menu, to develop the healthier, grilled, non-fried options that might have answered the health-conscious turn. There was no cushion to weather a bad year, no reserve of strength to draw on. The debt consumed everything. And so, at the precise moment in history when Long John Silver's most needed to invest, to modernize, to reinvent itself to survive a changing America, it instead found itself financially handcuffed, pouring its money into loan payments while its restaurants aged and its menu stayed frozen in the deep-fried past. The company struggled under that debt load for years through the 1990s, a decade when it should have been aggressively adapting, and instead spent the whole time gasping under the weight of a financial decision made in a boardroom. Sales declined. The chain, once so dominant, began to feel dated. The restaurants looked old. The menu felt like a relic. And a business already fighting two structural currents, now dragging an anchor of debt, simply could not keep its head above water. Picture the cruelty of the timing. The 1990s were exactly the decade when Long John Silver's most needed to reinvent itself, to answer the health turn with grilled options, to renovate the tired old buildings, to modernize the menu, to fight for relevance against a fast food world that was getting more competitive and more health-conscious every year. This was the decade for bold moves, for investment, for reinvention. And it was the exact decade the company had no money to do any of it, because every spare dollar was going to service the debt. It's like watching a swimmer who needs to make a hard push for shore, and who has, at that precise moment, a weight chained to their leg. The harder the times got, the more the chain needed resources to fight, and the debt guaranteed there were none. That's the quiet tragedy of a leveraged buyout gone wrong. It doesn't just hurt a company, it robs the company of the ability to save itself at the very moment salvation is most needed. In 1998, the inevitable finally happened. Jericho, the parent company, the Kentucky firm whose roots reached all the way back to that 1929 hamburger stand, was forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The empire had run aground. And that's the moment Long John Silver's stopped being a proud, independent, focused company and became something else. A passed-around asset. A brand shuffled from owner to owner, never again to have a parent whose whole heart was in it. The passing around started immediately. In 1999, the year after the bankruptcy, Long John Silver's was acquired by the company that owned A&W Restaurants. the old root beer and burger chain, and the two were combined into a new firm called Yorkshire Global Restaurants. Two aging, struggling American brands lashed together, hoping there was strength in the pairing. And then, in 2002, Yorkshire and its brands were swallowed by something much bigger. Tricon Global Restaurants, the enormous conglomerate that owned Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and KFC, and which would soon rename itself Yum Brands. Long John Silver's, the former king of fast food seafood, was now one small unit inside a giant portfolio dominated by tacos, pizza, and fried chicken. Being owned by Yum Brands might sound like a rescue, a small brand finding shelter under a huge, well-run parent. But in practice, it accelerated the identity crisis, and it did so through a strategy that, more than almost anything else, hollowed out what made Long John Silver's special. Yum Brands loved co-branding. They took to combining their restaurants under one roof, a single building that was half KFC and half Taco Bell, or half A&W and half Long John Silver's, sharing a kitchen, a counter, a dining room. From a corporate efficiency standpoint, it made sense. Two brands, one rent, one staff, one location. But think about what it did to Long John Silver's as an experience. That whole seafaring fantasy, the blue roof, the Cape Cod building, the ship's wheels, the lobster pots, the feeling of stepping into a little seaside fish shack was the entire emotional appeal of the brand, the thing that made a landlocked family feel like they'd traveled to the coast. And now that magic was being crammed into half of a generic combo box building, sharing space with a taco counter, its nautical soul stripped out for the sake of efficiency. Consider what the co-branding really revealed about how the new owners saw the brand. When you put Long John Silver's fish counter into the corner of a KFC, you are no longer treating it as a destination, as a place people choose to go, drive to, experience. You are treating it as an add-on, a menu extension, a way to squeeze a little extra revenue out of a building that primarily exists to sell fried chicken. The seafood is there as an option for the one person in the group who doesn't want chicken, not as the reason anyone came. That is a profound demotion. Long John Silver's had spent 30 years building itself into a place worth visiting for its own sake, a little pirate ship voyage, and the co-branding quietly redefined it as a sidecar, a bolt-on, a thing you might grab because it happened to be attached to the taco place you were already at. The standalone wooden ships, the ones that had planted the fantasy in 1,000 towns, began to disappear, replaced by a fried fish counter in the corner of somebody else's restaurant. The brand didn't just shrink. It lost its body, its physical magic, the thing that had made it more than just fried fish. Under Yum, Long John Silver's was frankly an afterthought. It was the small, weird, non-core brand in a company whose real energy went to KFC and Taco Bell and Pizza Hut. It didn't get the investment, the innovation, the love that a struggling brand needs to be turned around. It just sort of sat there, shrinking, a legacy holding in a portfolio built around other things. And in 2011, Yum Brands did the natural thing with a non-core afterthought. It sold Long John Silver's off, this time to a group of franchisees and investors, a consortium that included, in a small echo of the past, some connection to the chain's early leadership. The idea was that people who actually cared about Long John Silver's, who ran the restaurants and knew the brand, might be able to save it in a way a giant taco and chicken conglomerate never would. And that effort continues to this day, honestly and genuinely. The franchisee-led ownership has tried to steady the ship. They've worked to update the menu, to add some non-fried and grilled options, to acknowledge the health-conscious reality. They've tried to reconnect with the nostalgia so many people feel for the brand. They've leaned into that deep well of affection because it is real, the affection. People remember Long John Silver's fondly. They remember the Crumblies and the Hush Puppies and the pirate ship and the family dinners. But affection and nostalgia, it turns out, are not the same as regular business. A lot of people love Long John Silver's the way you love a memory, warmly, occasionally, from a distance. without actually going there very often. And a restaurant chain cannot survive on fond memories. It survives on people walking through the door this week and next week and the week after. This is one of the quietly saddest truths in the whole story, and it applies to almost every fallen chain. Nostalgia is not the same as customers. When a beloved old brand starts to struggle, you hear a great outpouring of love for it. People post about how much they adored it as kids. They share memories. They say they're heartbroken it's disappearing. And all of that love is genuine, but almost none of it translates into someone actually driving over and buying dinner on a random Tuesday. The affection lives in the past tense. People love what the place meant to them at 8 years old, love the memory of their family in that booth, love the Crumblies of 1985, but their actual eating habits have moved on to 100 other options. A brand can be simultaneously beloved and dying, adored in memory and empty at the counter, and that heartbreaking gap between how people feel about a place and how often they actually eat there is precisely the gap that a struggling chain falls into. Long John Silver's has all the love in the world. What it needs, and what it's been slowly losing for 30 years, is traffic. So today, Long John Silver's hangs on, a few hundred locations, a shadow of the 1,000-plus empire it once was. It has weathered its bankruptcy, its ownership carousel, its dilution into shared buildings, the slow erosion of its aging restaurants. It's still out there. You can still get the fish, the hush puppies, the Crumblies. But the great fast food seafood empire that once had no rival, that dominated its category so totally it seemed permanent, is now a small, struggling, nostalgic survivor, fighting the same two currents it has always fought, only now with far fewer ships in the water. So what killed it? What's the real lesson of Long John Silver's? The temptation is to blame the leveraged buyout, and it certainly delivered the crucial blow. The debt from 1989 is the single clearest turning point, the weight that dragged the company under at the exact moment it needed to swim hardest. If you had to name one decision that doomed Long John Silver's, that's the one. The company was surviving its structural challenges just fine until that debt landed, and it never recovered from it. There's a hard lesson in that about what leveraged buyouts can do to fundamentally sound but vulnerable companies. How a single financial maneuver, driven by deal makers rather than restaurant people, can hollow out a business's ability to invest in its own future and turn a manageable challenge into a fatal one. But the deeper truth is that the leveraged buyout was only fatal because of the two currents underneath. Long John Silver's was uniquely vulnerable to that debt precisely because its business was already so fragile, because it was selling a polarizing food that many Americans wouldn't eat, in a fried form that America was increasingly turning away from. A burger chain with that same debt might have survived, might have grown its way out, because burgers have a huge, stable, forgiving customer base. Long John Silver's had no such cushion. Its narrow base and its out-of-favor product meant it had zero margin for error, and the debt eliminated the last of that margin. The buyout was the blow, but the vulnerability to the blow was baked in from the beginning, from the fundamental decision to build an empire on fast food, fried seafood in a landlocked, increasingly health-conscious nation. And that's what makes Long John Silver's such a poignant story in the end. It was, in a way, a magnificent achievement that was always fighting its own nature. It took a food half the country was skeptical of and built a 1,000-restaurant empire on it. It took the romance of the sea and planted it in strip malls 1,000 miles inland. It gave millions of landlocked American families a taste of the coast, a pirate ship adventure over a cardboard box of golden fried fish. And for a couple of decades it did this better than anyone ever had or ever would. That it couldn't sustain that against the twin pressures of a changing diet and a crushing debt doesn't erase how improbable and how real the achievement was. Long John Silver's succeeded at something genuinely difficult for a genuinely long time, and the fact that it eventually lost doesn't mean it was ever easy or ever guaranteed. Somewhere out there tonight, in one of the few hundred that are left, the fryers are hot. A basket of whitefish goes down into the oil and comes up golden and crackling. Someone scoops the loose, crispy crumblies into a box, free, the way they always did. A family slides into a booth under a ship's wheel, or maybe just up to a counter tucked in the corner of a shared building, and orders the fish and the hush puppies the way their parents did and their grandparents did. And for a few minutes, the old seaside magic is still there. The salt, the crunch, the fried golden comfort, the little taste of a coast most of them have never seen. There used to be more than 1,000 doors you could walk through to find that. The blue roofs are mostly gone now, the wooden ships hauled away one by one, the great landlocked seafood empire scattered to a few hundred survivors. But the fish still comes up golden, the crumblies are still free. And for the people who remember, that first crackling, salty bite still tastes exactly like being 8 years old on a Friday night, in a pirate ship in the middle of America, 1,000 miles from any ocean, and somehow, impossibly, right there at the edge of the sea.